Hey everybody, so yesterday we talked about teams that will be buyers at the NHL trade deadline coming up in February, teams that were looking to make significant improvements to their team or looking to fill a specific role by making a trade. Today I want to look at the other end of the spectrum, who is going to be sellers come trade deadline time and what players are we likely to see moved off of those teams. So before we start, I just want to quickly remind everyone to please hit that like button down below. And if you are new to the channel, to please subscribe, as both of those things really help out a lot and are greatly appreciated. So let's talk about some sellers here coming up at the trade deadline, which is coming up at towards the end of February. And the first one I want to talk about is the Detroit Red Wings. Let's just start with the worst team in the league, a team that is certainly not going anywhere anytime soon. And they have a few different players that I think we'll likely see get moved. One of them, probably the most sought-after Red Wing, I think at this point, is Andreas Athanasiou, who is a really solid middle-of-the-lineup type player, somebody who can bring a lot of speed, help a team with secondary scoring, and I think as we talked about in the buying video, I think the main target for teams this year at the trade deadline is secondary scoring. So Athanasiou is a restricted free agent at the end of this season. His name has been up a lot in the recent trade rumors. I think he could help out a number of teams. And I think he's a guy that you would want in maybe like a third line role. Speed player, can bring some offense, can add a little bit of secondary scoring. So I think there's going to be a pretty hot trade market for a guy like Andreas Athanasiou this year at the deadline. Next couple of players from Detroit I want to talk about are defensemen, veteran defensemen, and they are Mike Green and Trevor Daley. Both of them are pending UFAs, so they will likely, if they are moved, just be rentals for the remaining third or so of this season and then a playoff run. But Mike Green, still a pretty solid player, certainly not the player that he used to be, 8-10 years ago, but still a pretty solid player. He can bring some offense from the back end. Veteran guy, been around the league a long time. So I could see certainly a team that's looking to improve their defense core and maybe add some defensive depth going into the postseason, going after a guy like Mike Green and possibly adding him to their top six, or maybe even only as, he's still a top six guy, maybe as a number 7, but he's really a top 6 guy still. Trevor Daley is the one who at this point is pretty much a depth player. Daley, he still can play. He's still pretty solid, but he's a bottom pair defenseman or a number 7 at this point. And again, he's just probably a depth move, a team looking to add defensive depth heading into the postseason. The next team I want to talk about is the Ottawa Senators, another team that obviously is out of it as far as the playoffs are concerned, which all these teams pretty much are. That's why they're sellers. But Ottawa has a lot of guys that they could potentially move. I could see, if they wanted to really trade everybody, I could see like a third of Ottawa's roster getting moved. That's probably not going to happen. I don't think they're going to unload that many guys. The big player from Ottawa that everyone is talking about, one of the most sought-after players on the market at the deadline this year, is J.G. Pageau. He's somebody who's having a very good season this year on a very bad team in Ottawa. He can really be a second-line center or a third-line center. I personally think that he's better suited as a third-line center, and I think on most good teams, or playoff-level teams, he would be a third-line center. But he can bring a lot of secondary scoring. He's a good two-way player. He's really gritty. He works hard. He's just a solid player to have somewhere in the middle of your lineup. Could potentially play wing if you needed him to, but I think most teams that are going after Pageau are looking for a center, and he would be a really good addition to a lot of teams' middle of their lineup in that role. He also UFA at the end of this season. Another couple players, another forward I think that could get moved by the Ottawa Senators is Vlad Namestnikov, who this would be another quick move for him as he's gone from Tampa Bay to the Rangers, now to Ottawa. He could potentially get moved again. Somebody who hasn't really found his game fully at the NHL level. Not having a bad season this year at all, actually having a pretty good year this year in Ottawa, but just, again, somebody now who's just kind of been floating around, more of a third-line type player. But Ottawa's in a position where they've got a lot of young guys coming up. They're going to continue to keep adding to that young prospect pool. Nemesnikov might not be a guy that they keep around. And if he does get moved, I think he'd be added in as a third-line, maybe even a fourth-line guy on a lot of teams, just, again, to bring in some secondary scoring. And finally, my final Ottawa player I want to talk about, someone who I haven't really heard a lot about as far as trades are going, but he is a pending UFA at the end of this season. He is, a veteran player, so it is possible that they move him, and that's Mark Borowiecki. And Mark Borowiecki is a really, really solid bottom pair type defenseman who's very, very tough. We all know that. He's more than willing to drop the gloves. He plays very physically, throws big hits, and he is exactly the kind of player you want on your back end heading into the postseason. When it's playoff time and it's time to play big boy hockey, Borowiecki is a great guy to have in the lineup, and he's been a very, very solid player for Ottawa over the last few years. We've seen him improve a ton over the last few seasons. Really was a fringe NHLer a few years ago. Now he's solidly been in the NHL for a number of years now. He's a really good stay-at-home defensive defenseman, and he's a guy that I think a team looking to add some more toughness, some more grit, and some defensive depth heading into the postseason could really, really use heading into the postseason. And he's not going to play 20, 22 minutes a night. He's a 16 to 18 minutes a night guy, but he could give you some quality defensive minutes as a bottom pair defenseman, and he's a guy I think teams could potentially go for. For the New Jersey Devils, obviously New Jersey has made their big trade. They unloaded Taylor Hall. He's in Arizona now, playing very well for the Arizona Coyotes. They do have one more player, though, that I think it's very likely gets moved, and that is Wayne Simmons. He's an unrestricted free agent at the end of the year, so another rental type deal. But Simmons is a guy who's really struggling this year on a really, really bad team in New Jersey. But he's a veteran guy. He's a really good leader. He's a locker room presence. He's played a lot of games in the NHL. He's played a lot of playoff games in the NHL. He's a guy that I think a team looking for depth could add into a postseason run. Now, the offense is pretty much gone with Wayne Simmons. He's not a 30-goal guy anymore. He's not even a 20-goal guy anymore. The offense has all but disappeared for Wayne Simmons. However, that does not mean that he can't be valuable to a team in a third or fourth line type role, just to come in, be a leader, be a veteran guy, and play quality bottom 6 minutes with a physical presence and a good work ethic. And a team that I think really could go after Wayne Simmons, to me, is a team like Colorado. I did a video last year saying that Colorado should have traded for Simmons at the deadline. They did not. He went to Nashville instead. Did not do very well with the Nashville Predators, but that entire team kind of crapped out in the playoffs and lost in the first round. I think Colorado is such a young team who is led by their young guys like Nathan McKinnon, Gabe Landeskog still in his mid-20s, Mikko Rantanen's young, Cale Makar's a rookie this year. They're so young that I think adding a veteran guy who's been through the playoffs before, who's played a lot of games, and kind of brings that added toughness and physicality needed come postseason time. I think Simmons would be a really good fit in a bottom 6 role on a team like Colorado. I still think he can provide value even though the offense is gone. And, is he going to score 10 goals in a playoff run? Probably not, but he can chip in 4 or 5 goals, another 2 or 3 assists, and he can be there in the locker room. He can be there to help the young players. He can be there to mentor, and he can be there to be a physical presence, somebody who will stand up for his teammates, somebody who will play physically in the playoffs that you need come postseason time in a bottom 6 role. And the Avalanche have cap space. They've got over $6 million in cap space, so the $5 million salary is not an issue. And then, he's a free agent again at the end of the year, so you just wipe him off the books at the end of the year. It's not a problem at all money-wise. So that makes the most sense to me. And finally, as far as Eastern Conference teams go, obviously we have Chris Kreider, who I think is the #1 trade target in the NHL at the deadline this year. He is the most talked about guy, the best player on this rental market that's probably available. Kreider obviously can be a very, very good second-line goal scorer. He's a UFA at the end of the season. I think there are a ton of teams involved with Chris Kreider of the New York Rangers, so they're going to move him. I think it's all but certain that Kreider gets moved this deadline. It's just a matter of what the Rangers get in return. Moving on now to the Western Conference, the only 3 teams in the West that I really see out of it, like have no shot, are the 3 California teams. So let's start with LA. Tyler Toffoli, probably definitely a top 3 target on the market this year. Similar to Chris Kreider, maybe not quite as good, maybe a lower cost Chris Kreider type player. Just really good secondary scorer, second or third line type guy who can score goals at a pretty high level and add offense to a team. Also a pending UFA. Definitely somebody that's largely going to be sought after and very, very likely to be traded this year. Couple of depth guys from LA that I think could get moved. Both are pending UFAs. Trevor Lewis and Kyle Clifford. Both are really solid fourth liners. They've played in this league for a long time now. They've been on some very, very good teams in LA. They've won a couple of Stanley Cups in LA. They've been really solid players, and they're unrestricted free agents. They're veteran guys. LA isn't going anywhere anytime soon. I think that those are guys that you could dump off. And if you're a team looking to add forward depth and maybe a little bit of grit and toughness heading into the big boy hockey season of playoff hockey, Clifford would obviously be a huge guy to have around, who's been a fighter at this level. He doesn't fight as much anymore, but still a very tough guy, very physical. And Lewis, too, while he doesn't really drop the gloves much, he is a fourth-line type player, someone who grinds along the wall, goes to the net, and can add quality minutes as a fourth-liner. So those are players for LA that I think could get moved. Anaheim, the big name talking about Anaheim is Josh Manson. And what makes Josh Manson different than all of these other players that we're talking about is he still has 2 years left on his contract beyond this year. So he has term on his contract. It's going to be a bigger deal to get Josh Manson than any of these rental players who are pending UFAs at the end of the year. Manson is a very solid top 4 defenseman, still pretty young. He's hasn't crossed over into the old man category yet. Solid young top 4 defenseman, good defensively, doesn't add a ton of offense, but that part of his game could continue to develop. Just really, really solid two-way guy. Brings some toughness, not afraid to be physical, and he's been on some playoff runs lately with Anaheim. Obviously, Anaheim not this year going to the postseason, but early in his career when Anaheim was still a top team in the West, Manson was a part of those teams, so some good experience as well, plus the 2 years beyond this year. If Manson does get traded, it's going to cost a lot. Anaheim's going to get a good return for him in a trade. And a couple of unrestricted free agents from Anaheim that I think could get moved. Michael Del Zotto, just a depth guy who can add a little bit of offense from the back end. So any team looking to add to their defensive depth, who maybe are looking for a good skater and a little bit of offense from a bottom defenseman type role, could be in on Michael Del Zotto. And Derek Grant, the forward, just a solid fourth-line player. I think he's proven over the last few years in the NHL that he is a solid fourth-line, grinded-out type player. And again, any team looking for depth could go for a guy like Derek Grant. And the last player I want to talk about comes from the San Jose Sharks. Now, San Jose's obviously had a miserable year this year. Conference finals last year to a bottom 3 team this year. Not very bottom 3 in their division team this year. Obviously a disaster of a season. They really don't have a lot to sell. Thornton and Marlowe are probably in their final seasons. I don't think either of them want to go anywhere. They're not going to move. Other guys, a lot of their team is locked up under contract now for a while. So they don't have a ton to sell, but the one guy that I really do think San Jose gets moved is Brendan Dillon, defenseman. He's just a really, really solid defensive defenseman, bottom pair type guy, but very, very good quality bottom pair type guy. I think he would make any playoff team better as a guy, somebody who is, you know, not a big name, not a high flyer, not somebody who's going to be dynamic or anything, but somebody who's going to come in, play night in and night out on a third pair, and just be really, really solid. He's big, he plays physically, he can drop the gloves if he needs to. Doesn't add a ton of offense, but can chip in here and there offensively, can kill penalties, good stay-at-home guy, and only 29 years old. So, I think Brendan Dillon is the most likely Shark to get traded, and I think he will make a nice addition to a team's defense core heading into the postseason. So those are my trade deadline sellers. Definitely the biggest sellers come deadline time this year in the NHL. Detroit, Ottawa, New Jersey, New York Rangers, LA, Anaheim, and San Jose. So we'll see, you know, if all of these guys get moved. I assume at least most of these guys will get moved. Certainly some of them will. But those are the big sellers in my book, and we'll see what actually happens and what these deals look like come trade deadline time as these teams, as these playoff teams trade for guys to boost their lineup heading into the postseason. So with that, like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media. All those links are down in the description. If you'd like to further support the channel, the links to our Patreon and merchandise store are down in the description as well. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you guys soon.